We've talked about photosynthesis. We said there are two stages or two reactions involved in photosynthesis. Now we know that in your photosynthesis general equation would be 6 molecules of carbon dioxide plus 6 molecules of water, plus of course light energy. This is from the sun, and of course this is going to give us 1 molecule of glucose and 6 molecules of oxygen gas. Now remember, yesterday we said glucose is the main product of photosynthesis. This is the food that we find in plants, and of course this is the food that we also eat. Okay, the food that we eat from plants, like your fruits, your vegetables, those are going to be the glucose that is formed during photosynthesis. Now again, we said your 6 molecules of oxygen here is given off to the atmosphere, and of course this is very important for us animals. Okay, so again, this is the general equation. This is the balanced chemical equation for photosynthesis. But of course we know from yesterday's lecture that there are also two reactions which happen in photosynthesis. Now the question is, what when we have the two reactions in photosynthesis, the first one we call it the light dependent reaction, the other one is called the light independent reaction or the dark reaction. Now who can give us the difference between those two? We say light reaction, your light reaction uses sunlight. Okay, directly uses sunlight. And of course, we know that during your light reaction, sunlight here is converted into your chemical energy in the form of ATP and NADPH. Now, another thing that happens during your light reaction, of course, is that water is converted into oxygen gas. Now, remember, the light reaction happens in the thylakoid because this is where you find your chlorophyll. Okay, that's the green pigment that can, of course, collect sunlight. Now, again, your dark reaction, this one is a dark reaction here. This is also called the light independent reaction, also called Calvin cycle, from the name of the scientist who discovered this, which was, of course, Melvin Calvin. Okay, so again, we say your light independent reaction or dark reaction, this is called such because it does not use sunlight directly. Okay, it does not use sunlight as its source of energy. Now, can anyone tell us what it uses? What does it use? Why does your dark reaction still happen even if there's no presence of sunlight?
It gets the energy from the products of the sunlight reaction, which are NADPH and ATP.
Okay, very good. Okay, so that precisely is the reason why your dark reaction can happen. Even if it does not need or it does not use your sunlight directly, it already has its sources of energy, and that would be the products of your light reaction, ATP and NADPH. These are two molecules that can store energy. Okay, so this is the energy that is used by your Calvin cycle, your dark reaction, so that it can start. Now, again, please do not have the misconception that your dark reaction only happens at night. Okay, that is not true. It is only called dark reaction because it does not use sunlight directly. Okay, but of course we know that it also uses some forms of energy, and these are also the products of your light reaction. Okay, so and so we can also say still that your light reaction is necessary so that your dark reaction may happen. Okay, now again, your dark reaction here changes carbon dioxide into the major source or major product in photosynthesis, which is of course your glucose. Okay, that's C6H12O6. Now again, since your ATP here and your NADPH, we said in your ATP, your energy here is concentrated in the phosphate group. Your NADPH, the energy is concentrated in your hydrogen. Since these are used by your Calvin cycle or your dark reaction, these in turn are going to be returned to their structure, which is NADP and ADP. Okay, so that means they have released some parts of their energy. And so what it does, or what they do, is they go back to your light reaction again to harness more energy so that they can go back to being ATP and NADPH. Now remember, your ATP, this is known as the energy currency of the cell because it drives all the processes within a cell. Okay, so all the processes in a cell is driven, or it is possible because of the presence of your energy currency, which is of course your ATP. Now, another difference between your light reaction and your dark reaction here is that your dark reaction does not need to happen in your thylakoid because it does not need chlorophyll. Okay, so this here dark reaction happens in the stroma, that is the fluid inside your chloroplast. Okay, so again, these are the different parts of photosynthesis. We've talked about this yesterday. We also said that whenever you have your photosynthesis, some factors can affect it. Okay, so these factors, of course, are the different reactants that we have. We have water, there's sunlight, there's also carbon dioxide, and of course, we've also mentioned that temperature can also affect your photosynthesis. So that means if you have a higher amount of carbon dioxide, for example, that means there's going to be a faster rate for photosynthesis. More glucose are going to be produced if you have more amount of carbon dioxide. Okay, so again, this summarizes photosynthesis. Now, today's topic again would be cellular respiration. And yesterday, in your independent work, you were asked about the relationship between photosynthesis and cellular respiration. Now, looking at the slide that we have here, we know that only your plants are able to do photosynthesis. Okay, this is the process through which plants make their food. And of course, you have the reactants here, carbon dioxide, water, and light. And of course, the products are glucose, that's the major product, and the byproduct, which is oxygen gas. Okay, so this is the waste product. This is given off to the air. Now, of course, we know that in your light reaction, ATP is also produced, but this ATP is also used in your dark reaction. And so generally, we don't write ATP to be one of the products of photosynthesis because it is used up in the process. Okay, now as for your cellular respiration, this can happen in both plants and animals. Okay, so again, that's both plants and animals. So that means your plants can do both photosynthesis and cellular respiration. Now, in your cellular respiration here, glucose and oxygen gas are the reactants. This happens in the mitochondria of the cell. Again, as I've mentioned, both your animals and plants can do cellular respiration because, of course, both of these organisms here have mitochondria, the powerhouse of the cell. This is where ATP, the energy of the cell, is produced. Now, the products of your cellular respiration are carbon dioxide, there's water, and of course, ATP. The main goal of cellular respiration is to make ATP. So then now, if you will be asked, what is the relationship between photosynthesis and cellular respiration? What should be your answer?
They're direct opposites of each other because the reactants of photosynthesis are the products of cellular respiration and vice versa.
Okay, very good. Okay, so that should have been your answer. He has mentioned that the products of photosynthesis are the reactants of cellular respiration and vice versa. Okay, so they are direct opposites of each other. One cannot happen without the other. Okay, so that means plants photosynthesis is not only important because this can make your plants make food so that we can also eat those food, your fruits, your vegetables. But also, of course, this would give us oxygen that we breathe in. And another thing is that this oxygen is also used by our cell to make energy. Okay, so this is also used in the making of ATP. We don't use just glucose from the food that we eat, but also oxygen that we breathe in. Okay, so again, photosynthesis and cellular respiration are direct opposites of each other. One cannot happen without the other. Two types of cellular respiration here, which is of course our main topic today. We actually have two types of cellular respiration. The first one is aerobic. This is with the presence of ample amount of oxygen. The other one is anaerobic. This means your oxygen supply is not enough. Okay, we don't actually just say zero supply of oxygen, but we say your oxygen supply is not enough whenever you have anaerobic respiration. Okay, now going to the different processes that we have here, again, we have the two types of cellular respiration. The presence of O2 here would make this side, the right side of your slide, aerobic. Okay, so this side here is aerobic. Now the left side, O2 not present or O2 not enough, this is going to be your anaerobic respiration, okay? Anaerobic cellular respiration. Now, both of these respiration here, both types of respiration start with the first stage, which is glycolysis, okay? So both of them would start with glycolysis. Now, the glycolysis here is the breaking down of glucose. Okay, hence glucose is also a very important part of your cellular respiration. Hence, it is very important that you take in glucose. Okay, so again, glucose or glycolysis is the breaking down of glucose. Now, if you have ample supply of oxygen, that means cellular respiration, aerobic cellular respiration will happen. From glycolysis here, the products of your glycolysis, your pyruvate, that is going to be transported, that's going to be transferred to the Krebs cycle, which is the second stage of aerobic cellular respiration. Okay, that's the Krebs cycle. Krebs cycle is named such because of the name of the scientist who discovered this. Okay, that's Hans Krebs. Now, the products of your Krebs cycle are going to be transported to the last part, the last stage of aerobic cellular respiration, which is electron transport chain. Okay, that's electron transport chain, ETC, which is the stage of cellular respiration that gives us the most amount of ATP. Okay, so the most amount of ATP is going to be produced in your electron transport chain. So basically, the total amount of ATP that we can get is max would be 38. Okay, but usually an organism can only produce 30. Okay, so that's a maximum of 36 ATPs. Now, again, these are the different stages of your aerobic cellular respiration. You start with breaking down of glucose, that's glycolysis. Then second stage is Krebs cycle. Then last stage, which generates the most amount of ATP, the most amount of energy, is electron transport chain, or ETC. Now, for your anaerobic cellular respiration, that means your supply of oxygen is not enough. After glycolysis, what you'll have would be fermentation. Okay, that's fermentation. Now, two things can happen here. Depending on the type of product that it can produce, the first product may be lactic acid. Okay, so this happens in your muscles whenever you're exercising. Of course, your muscles are using your carbohydrate. Okay, they are trying to burn your carbohydrate. Your glucose is going to be broken down into pyruvate. Now, if your O2 is not present, your O2 is not enough, that means you're not consciously breathing in. Instead of your cellular respiration to be aerobic, and instead of going through the different processes here at the right side of your slide, what happens is that your muscles are going to undergo fermentation. Okay, your glucose there, the pyruvate, that's going to undergo fermentation, which can lead to the production of lactic acid. And this here, lactic acid, ladies and gentlemen, this is the one that makes your muscles cause cramps. Okay, so this is the cause of muscular cramps. This gives you pain in your muscles. So that means it is very important that whenever you go to the gym, whenever you're exercising, you should be consciously breathing in. Okay, you need to have ample supply of oxygen so that you not create lactic acid, so that you won't, your cells won't undergo fermentation, so that of course you won't have any muscular cramps. Now, instead of lactic acid, in some types of substances, like for your yeast, for example, you are going to be forming ethanol. It's going to form ethanol or ethyl alcohol from fermentation. Okay, so ethyl alcohol here, this is the type of fermentation that that happens in your vinegar, the type of fermentation that happens in your alcoholic beverages. Okay, so alcoholic beverages that would contain ethyl alcohol, the product of fermentation. So again here, this summarizes the two types of cellular respiration, again in the presence of oxygen. After glycolysis, you'll have Krebs cycle and electron transport chain. If oxygen supply is not enough after glycolysis, you can have fermentation. Two possible products here, lactic acid, which gives you muscular cramps, and of course ethyl alcohol or ethanol, which would give us your vinegar, which would give us your alcoholic beverages. We go to the different stages of aerobic respiration here. Okay, we've already mentioned it starts with glycolysis. This is a breaking down of glucose, hence the term glycolysis, the lysis of glucose. Okay, the breaking down of glucose. Now, glucose here is broken down to two molecules of pyruvate. Your pyruvate here only has 3 carbons. That means for 1 molecule of glucose, you can actually have 2 molecules of pyruvate. Okay, but because remember, glucose is C6H12O6, which means that it has 6 carbon atoms. So since your pyruvate here only has 3 carbons, for 1 molecule of glucose, you can actually produce 2 molecules of pyruvate. Now, it's also very important for you to know that this, the first stage of cellular respiration does not occur in your mitochondria. This here happens in the cytoplasm of the cell. Okay, so it starts in the cytoplasm of the cell. Now, these products, the products of glycolysis, these are going to be transported into the mitochondria, and they would undergo the Krebs cycle or the citric acid cycle. Okay, this is another term for your Krebs cycle. It's also called citric acid cycle because citric acid is the first product of this stage of aerobic respiration. So in here, your glucose is going to be completely broken down, and this process is also going to give us the electrons that is going to start the last stage of cellular respiration. Okay, now again, this happens in the mitochondria, specifically in the matrix, which is the fluid of your mitochondria. Okay, now once we are done with the Krebs cycle, we already have the electrons that can start your electron transport chain. Okay, and then again, as we've mentioned, your electron transport chain produces the most amount of energy out of all 3 stages of aerobic respiration. Okay, now your electron transport chain also happens in the mitochondria, the powerhouse of the cell, but instead of happening in the matrix, the fluid, this one happens in the inner membrane, or what you call the cristae of your mitochondria. Okay, so it happens in the cristae of your mitochondria. So this here summarizes aerobic respiration. So again, we start with glycolysis. Glucose is broken down into 2 molecules of pyruvic acid or 2 molecules of pyruvate. Those products are going to be transported inside the mitochondria. Your Krebs cycle will happen in the matrix of your mitochondria, the fluid inside your mitochondria. And then, of course, this is going to give off carbon dioxide and electrons. Okay, those electrons are going to be transported to the last stage of aerobic respiration, which is your electron transport system or electron transport chain. And of course, this here, this part here, this stage is going to give us the most amount of energy in the form of ATP. Now also make sure that you see that oxygen gas here is used up by ETC. And so I've mentioned the more O2 you have, the more oxygen you have, the better is going to be the production of ATP. Okay, the more ATP, the more energy produced if you have more oxygen supply. And then of course, water is also given off. Now, as you can see, oxygen and glucose are the reactants of your aerobic respiration. These are actually the products of your photosynthesis, and they are used up to start aerobic respiration or cellular respiration. Now, the products of cellular respiration, again, will be water and carbon dioxide, and of course, ATP. And of course, carbon dioxide and water here, these are going to be the reactants of your photosynthesis. Okay, so as we've mentioned, photosynthesis and cellular respiration are direct opposites of each other. Whatever is produced by photosynthesis, your oxygen and glucose, those are going to start your cellular respiration. Okay, whatever is produced by cellular respiration, carbon dioxide, water, those are of course going to be used by your chloroplast in a process called photosynthesis. So again, they are direct opposites of each other. The reactant of one becomes a product of the other, and vice versa. And of course, as you can see here in our illustration, again, remember, your plants can do both photosynthesis and cellular respiration, but your animal cells cannot do photosynthesis, okay? We can only do cellular respiration, never photosynthesis, because of course our cells do not have chloroplast. Okay, now this slide here summarizes everything that we've studied today. Okay, so again, we are trying to compare photosynthesis, cellular respiration. The organisms that would undergo photosynthesis, plants only. Okay, since they're the only ones who have chloroplast. For your cellular respiration, this can happen to both plants and animals. Okay, both plants and animals, since of course both of them have mitochondria, the powerhouse of the cell. The goal of photosynthesis is to make food. Okay, make food not only for your plants, but also, of course, food that we can eat. Now, another thing, of course, it's not placed here, since it is not the main goal of photosynthesis. Of course, your photosynthesis also very important for us because it gives us oxygen. Okay, now for your cellular respiration, the goal is to make ATP. Okay, energy in the form of ATP. This is the energy currency of the cell because it starts all the chemical processes inside the cell. The reactants of photosynthesis here, light, water, and carbon dioxide, becomes the products of cellular respiration. Okay, so the reactants here again are the products of cellular respiration, water and carbon dioxide. ATP and light energy here, of course, they are just the same. Okay, they're just the same because they are just sources of energy. Now, the reactants of cellular respiration, your glucose and oxygen gas, these were actually the products of photosynthesis. Okay, now again, remember, they are direct opposites of each other. The reactants or the products of one becomes the product of one becomes the reactant of the other. Now, as to the organelle, that part of the cell where they happen, photosynthesis again happens in the chloroplast, and cellular respiration here happens in the mitochondria.